Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, August 21st, 2023. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for joining us today. President Biden is moments away from touchdown in Hawaii as authorities continue to search for more than 800 people missing after the catastrophic wildfires there. We'll hear from the White House and also from FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell coming up. A judge has signed off on a $200,000 bond for Donald Trump in the Georgia election case, according to court filings. The order forbids the former president from intimidating any co-defendants or witnesses in the case as he awaits trial. And a new poll out today in Iowa shows those Georgia indictments have only helped the former president increase his lead among Republican voters there. We'll look into the numbers coming up. We began aboard Air Force One, where Deputy White House Press Secretary Olivia Dalton spoke to reporters about wildfires in Washington state, Tropical Storm Hillary hitting California, and the president's plans in Hawaii.
President Biden was able to speak to Governor Jay Inslee about the fires burning in Washington state, and he let the governor know that he had authorized fire management assistant grants to support firefighting that is underway in the state. With respect to Tropical Storm Hillary that we're seeing on the ground on the West Coast, since Friday when President Biden first spoke about the tropical storm from Camp David, he's received regular briefings from senior White House staff on the path and potential impact of the storm. As soon as the storm's path became clear, the president took immediate action and directed FEMA to deploy personnel and supplies to California so they could be surged to impacted communities. He directed the U.S. Coast Guard to pre-position aircraft to allow for rapid response and search and rescue efforts. And yesterday, the president spoke to Governor Newsom about the emergency preparedness measures in place. The administration also deployed federal personnel to Nevada and continues to coordinate with Arizona, California, and Nevada to provide any resources they need. As the president said in his statement on Friday, people should continue to take this storm seriously and listen to state and local officials. Now, today, we're en route to Hawaii, where the President and First Lady will have a chance to meet with survivors, first responders, and officials about the tragic wildfires that have devastated Maui. Over the weekend and ahead of this visit, President Biden has continued to receive regular updates from his senior team, as well as Administrator Criswell, regarding the ongoing recovery efforts underway. Yesterday, the President also spoke to Governor Green and Maui County Mayor Bisson to get the latest updates on the ground. During their visit today, the President and First Lady will visit Lahaina, a community of significant historical and cultural importance, to survey the damage firsthand and receive a briefing from local officials. The President will honor the victims of the Maui wildfires and their families and affirm that the entire nation stands with the people of Hawaii during this time of grief and recovery. As we move into the next stage of recovery, he will also announce that Bob Fenton will be named Chief Federal Response Coordinator for Maui. Bob has been on the ground from day one and will lead the longer-term effort to help Maui rebuild and recover in the longer-term efforts ahead. This reflects POTUS's president's commitment, as he said yesterday, to be there for Maui as long as it takes.
Deputy White House Press Secretary Olivia Dalton speaking to reporters on Air Force One. Authorities say at least 110 people have died because of the fires. It's the worst disaster in Hawaii state history and the deadliest wildfires in the U.S. in more than a century. With more on the federal response, here's FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell.
As you know, I'm traveling today with the President and the First Lady to survey the damage and see the impact in Maui. He's going to have an opportunity to speak with survivors about their loss, but also he's going to have an opportunity to talk with all of the emergency responders and really let them know what a great job that they have been doing. As recovery moves into the next phase, as you just heard, our Region 9 Regional Administrator, Bob Fenton, is going to be designated as the Chief Federal Response Coordinator, and he's going to make sure that he is coordinating all the long-term recovery efforts on the ground, but also ensuring that every federal asset is available to Maui to help this community rebuild. A couple of numbers as an update from my briefing this morning. We have already distributed over $8.5 million to residents of Maui. $3.6 million of that is for direct rental assistance, and this is from 8,000 registrations, so 8,000 families that have registered for assistance. We continue to have more than 1,000 federal responders on the ground, and this is from dozens of federal agencies, departments and agencies. There are 16 people that remain in shelters, and we have close to 2,000 people that we have already moved into hotel rooms.
Meanwhile, after drenching Southern California from the Pacific coast to Palm Springs, now post-tropical storm Hillary is moving northeast into Nevada. The National Hurricane Center is warning that, quote, continued life-threatening and locally catastrophic flooding is expected across the Southwest, with significant rainfall and flooding possible as far north as Oregon and Idaho. Here's more from Administrator Criswell on how FEMA is handling the multiple disasters.
Yeah, we have a very layered approach to our staffing. We have our disaster reservists, which are really the foundation of our ability to surge and go into communities that have been impacted by disasters. We have additional disaster response permanent staff that are located within our regions and headquarters. They're our initial footprint to go out there and support these types of events. We rely on a lot of support from our federal partners through mission assignments, but we can also tap into our other permanent full-time staff that don't do this in their blue sky days, and we can mobilize them to support disaster response efforts as needed. And then we also have a tool called our Surge Capacity Force, which gives us the ability to reach out to a number of volunteers that have said that they would want to assist across the Department of Homeland Security. So it allows us to tap into over 6,000 additional DHS employees to come in and support our efforts if needed.
She also talked about her agency's ability to pay for the response efforts after warning yesterday on CBS News' Face the Nation that funding could dry up within weeks.
As I have been stating for the last several weeks now, that we anticipate the Disaster Relief Fund to go into a negative balance sometime in the beginning to middle of September. What that means, and we take into account as we're doing that analysis, events just like this, so we can continue to respond and make sure that we can surge the federal government in. As we approach that negative balance, what we will end up doing is we will start to push some of our recovery projects across the country into the next fiscal year to ensure that we have enough funding to continue to support the immediate response needs for this event and anything else that might come up over the next several weeks before the end of the fiscal year.
And the replenishment of that fund that was requested with the supplemental, is there any projection as to how long that would last, with the caveat that you don't know whatever disasters may arise at any moment?
Yeah, the supplemental amount that we requested, which was $12 billion, will just allow us to continue working as normal through the end of this fiscal year. And as we continue to see the impacts of what these disasters are bringing, we're going to have to closely analyze, how much is going to be needed to continue to support the increase in the number of these severe weather events with these truly complex recoveries that we've been responding to.
FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell talking to reporters aboard Air Force One as she heads to Hawaii with the President and First Lady. The Air Force One scheduled to land in Hawaii any moment. C-SPAN is covering the President's visit there. You can find our coverage at cspan.org. Former President Donald Trump was granted a $200,000 bond earlier today ahead of his expected surrender at the Fulton County Jail in Georgia. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporting that under the terms of the consent bond order, Donald Trump can't perform any acts of witness intimidation and can only communicate about the facts of the case with his co-defendants through his lawyer. The document was signed by Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee and Donald Trump's 3 Atlanta-based attorneys. A handful of other defendants were also granted bond orders today, including attorneys John Eastman, Kenneth Cheeseborough, and Ray Smith, and also Scott Hall, who was involved in the Coffee County election data breach. Congress continues its summer recess this week, but they return next month to a busy floor schedule. Both the House and Senate are expected to take up spending bills to fund the government through next year and prevent a government shutdown. Current government funding expires on September 30th. Lawmakers are also facing an end of the month deadlines to reauthorize FAA and pandemic preparedness programs. And TheHill.com reporting today that the House Freedom Caucus says it will oppose any temporary government funding bill that doesn't include policy measures relating to the border, the Department of Justice, and quote-unquote woke policies at the Pentagon. Hill Congressional reporter Emily Brooks writing that the announcement comes after Speaker McCarthy told House Republicans last week that he expects to pass a short-term continuing resolution that could go past September 30th to avoid a government shutdown. You can read more of her article at thehill.com, and you can get all of our congressional coverage at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Campaign 2024 news now, and a new poll of Republican voters in Iowa out today not only shows former President Trump continuing to hold the dominant lead over the rest of the GOP field, but that his lead grew following his Georgia indictments. The Des Moines Register NBC News Mediacom Iowa poll of likely Republican caucus goers was conducted last week as the former president was hit with those indictments. In the days before the announcement, the poll showed Donald Trump leading Florida Governor Ron DeSantis by 18 percentage points. That margin grew to 23 points among respondents surveyed after the indictment was announced. 42% of the respondents said Donald Trump is their first choice out of 14 Republican candidates. 19% picked Governor DeSantis. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott came in third place with 9%, while former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley and former Vice President Mike Pence both sit at 6%. And here is the former vice president talking about the allegations against his former running mate.
Look, President Trump is entitled to a presumption of innocence. He's entitled to his day in court. And I'm just not going to comment on the latest leak or the latest reporting coming out of that process.
Okay, let me ask you, fully taking your point that everybody is presumed innocent until proven guilty. I remember in 2002, you voted to expel James Traficant, not after he was accused, but after he was convicted of a felony on corruption charges. You and virtually every other member of the House voted to expel him, saying that it wasn't right to have a convicted felon as a member of Congress. Would you hold that same standard for the White House?
Well, I would tell you that it is the function of the Congress to determine membership where there's ethical violations. And I remember the Traficant case from about 20 years ago. It was really quite outrageous, John. But if you're saying would I apply that to my former running mate in this race, look, I think that needs to be left to the American people. Look, let's have the former president have his day in court. Let's maintain a presumption of innocence in this matter and in the other matter that unfolded this week here in Georgia. But I've said many times, John, I would have preferred that these matters be left to the judgment of the American people. I mean, no one's above the law, but with regard to the president's future, my hope is when we get to that debate stage, and I'm still kind of hoping maybe he'll come, is that we can really have a debate about the challenges facing the American people.
Former Vice President Mike Pence yesterday on ABC News This Week. Of course, the first Republican presidential debate is scheduled for Wednesday. The former president has said he will not attend, but CBS News congressional reporter Scott MacFarlane says key dates on the Republican primary calendar and the former president's legal issues are inextricably linked.
These four tentative trial dates are all in 2024, and they mesh right in there with the primary calendar. The proposed trial date for this January 6, 2020 election conspiracy case here in Washington, for now, the prosecutors recommend January 2nd, 2 weeks before the Iowa caucuses. The second proposed trial date is March 4th, Fulton County. That's the day before Super Tuesday. It's 8 days before the Georgia primary. Then comes a March 25th trial date in Manhattan, followed by a May 20th trial date, tentatively, from the special counsel in Florida. It's an awful lot of legal action in the middle of primary season, so it's hard to understand at this moment how anybody else would get the oxygen they could get otherwise from the news media, from cable television, from online news sources. Also, it's hard to understand how Donald Trump can message on anything besides his legal battles if they're happening during the primaries themselves.
What's the attempt from the Trump team in order to push off these, say, after the election?
Yeah, there's a consistent effort from the Trump legal team to push all four of those past the election. Let's start with the one here in Washington, D.C., this 2020 election conspiracy case, which legal analysts say could be the most efficient. It is succinctly addressed in the charging document. There are no co-defendants. It has the potential to go to trial first. Donald Trump's legal team has just recommended it be pushed back to April 2026. The judge will decide Monday, a week from today, what the trial date's going to be. So August 28th, we'll get our at least tentative trial date in that first case. Trump's trying to push the Georgia and Manhattan cases back. He's been doing that since they were charged. In Florida, he also recommended it go after Election Day. The prosecutors wanted it to happen in December, so they kind of met in the middle and are going with May 2024. But none of these trial dates is etched in stone. None of them should be written down in pencil or in pen or marker. I recommend pencil because you have to have a good eraser to deal with these trial dates.
When it comes then to later on this week, we're expecting the president to turn himself in when it comes to the election case in Georgia. Tell what might or might not happen concerning that.
He has until a deadline of 12 p.m. Eastern Time Friday, according to the Fulton County District Attorney, to surrender himself for processing in Georgia. Not for pretrial detention, but to have the things that need to be done in Georgia. It could be fingerprinting, booking photo, some administrative paperwork that happens at the Rice Jail, the local jail in Fulton County, which we're told is open 24/7. He can come in as if it were a 7-Eleven, whatever time he wants to show up for the services rendered. That likely will happen later in the week on our initial sets of reporting, but he could try to choreograph that or synchronize that to happen Wednesday, same date and time as the first GOP primary debate, which he says he will not be attending.
As far as the legal strategies on these 4 individual cases, besides pushing them off, what's the president's general approach for defense on the 4 cases?
There should be some variation between them. There should be some differences. 2 of them are local, 2 of them are federal. Let's start with the January 6, 2020 election conspiracy case. What Donald Trump has been arguing is that he was exercising political speech and First Amendment rights when doing the things he's accused of doing in this indictment. This grand jury indictment for the January 6 election conspiracy case accuses the former president of obstructing an official proceeding, that January 6th electoral count, of conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, and of conspiracy to defraud the United States. All of this includes the actions between Election Day 2020, November 3rd, and January 6, 2021, be it the fake electors scheme, be it the efforts to leverage, if not intimidate, local election officials to overturn their legitimate results, and using January 6th and the Capitol riot itself as a bit of cover, as a bit of tool to reach out again to members of the Congress and have them try to hold off the completion of the proceedings. So he's going to make an argument of First Amendment rights or political speech. In Florida, he's going to argue that those records were his, that they weren't the property of the federal government, or that there was some type of declassification that occurred, and that he was not obstructing justice and obstructing the investigation. In Georgia, where we have something symmetrical to the 2020 election conspiracy case, we've seen him already criticize the prosecutor, accuse her of being overzealous, and there's your connective tissue between all 4 prosecutions. The former president and his most ardent supporters in the Republican Party have argued this is prosecutorial overreach and an attempt to defang, if not dethrone, the likely Republican nominee next year.
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane on Washington Journal this morning. You can see more at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can get more of our campaign 2024 unfiltered coverage. In Denmark today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked lawmakers for helping his country in its war against Russia. His appearance comes a day after both the Danish and Dutch governments announced that they would provide the Ukrainian military with U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets. President Zelensky spoke in Copenhagen.
Dear friends, today we are confident that Russia will lose this war. But this is not the only main thing. The main thing is what we prove with our victory, with our cooperation, what you prove supporting Ukraine. Together, we prove that life is a value, that people matter, freedom matters, Europe matters.
Now, Ukrainian officials have been asking its Western allies for F-16s for months. Its armed forces are still using Soviet-era combat planes from the 1970s and 80s. President Zelensky's speech is his third appearance in Europe over the past week. He now heads to Greece for talks with government leaders in Athens. A reminder, you can get this program as a podcast. You can find it on the podcast tab on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. You can also go to cspan.org/podcasts. And you can find it on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. You can also get it wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And you can get more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day with C-SPAN's Word for Word. You can go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum inviting you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington to across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, as part of a week-long series looking at key 2022-2023 Supreme Court cases, we'll talk about the court's ruling on affirmative action at Harvard and the University of North Carolina with Center for Equal Opportunity's Devin Westhill and NAACP Legal Defense Fund's Jin Hee Lee. Also, we'll discuss President Biden's re-election strategy and White House news of the day with USA Today White House correspondent Francesca Chambers. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, or online at cspan.org.